Can you hear me, Matt?
I can, Art. How are you doing?
Oh, fine. I've tried 3 times on 3 different devices to talk, and I was talking to myself 3 times. So
Take a hint.
I
Take a hint, Art. Come on.
I finally got on one that works.
I talk to myself all the time, Art. It's okay.
So I really wanted to go back, and we were talking about information consumption and knowledge consumption and how to use it in that. And so even though we have those statistics up there for the different types of things we prefer, if we really think about it, in a given day, we learn things in many different ways. So we may have a preferred style, but if I'm on the road, like I was a little bit ago, and listening in, I'm listening one way and taking in knowledge one way. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Moran, that was talking about listening to podcasts on the way to Loyola University. And so, I used to do that, and other things I like to do hands-on. And students are in that same state now. And so when technology doesn't keep up and faculty don't keep up, it causes a problem. And right now, I think maybe the way we go about it in introducing it to faculty is wrong. It's trying to understand how we can do these things in many different ways, and then introduce the technology that applies that's going to address those different things. Sometimes we come in like with Zoom all of a sudden, I'd never heard of it, a year ago, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere and it's everything. And that's not the way it should be. And so it's not used well because people didn't buy in, weren't taught on it, and all that kind of stuff. So that's very important. And higher education is changing. If you look at the University of Phoenix's and the Western Governors and the Southern New Hampshire's and some of the other schools around, they've already broken down the terms and the way that people go about their learning progress. So they go, and for Western Governors, you can start at any time and finish at any time. It's that way to go. And I talk to schools all the time that, hey, they have graduations nearly every day, and they start new terms every day. And so from an administrative standpoint, we haven't kept up in that regard. So if you look at any of the ERPs trying to deal with that kind of academic term structure, well, it's impossible right now. And again, it's something we deal with every day. So we have some problems to fix. And we also have to understand that we can't introduce one solution and expect it to fit all, that it has to be flexible in its approaches so that it can go and incorporate as many people as possible. And now I'll shut up.
Art, that was great. You just became the host on our second topic, which is timeframes. And I mean, you carried it. So Tiffany, when you're doing the recording, start when Art comes in, because it dialogues right into our time frame discussion. So that was perfect. I think timeframes is one of the biggest things that handcuff universities and colleges. If you think about what it does, there's a 120-hour time frame for a degree. There is 16-week courses as a standard for financial aid. There is the synchronous time frame. So Dr. LeBlanc, a friend of the show, and he did a podcast for us on our FutureX Tribe, and I'd welcome you guys to listen to it, and I'll try to get the link and put it on here. He said, he made a comment that I will never forget, and he said, "Time is the enemy of the poor." Just think about what he just said. He said, time is the enemy of the poor. And what he meant by that is when you put time limits, time constraints, it is the people that aren't socially and economically in the right position to take on the advantages of learning. That was probably the most when I listened to it, it took me back, because me, I don't have that constraint as much, because I have flexibility to do some of the things I want to do. But there are many people who are constrained by the time when they can be educated, by the time they could afford to take a course, the amount of degree time that they need. So I'm going to do this poll really quick. And let's see, I call it time is the enemy of the poor. So how does time frame constrain higher ed? And I'm going to ask you guys, it's multiple, so you can select multiple things. But based on that discussion that I just said, that Dr. LeBlanc said that time is the enemy of the poor, I'd love for you guys to answer this poll. And as we do all polls, be welcome to discuss the content and the thoughts as you think about this. And the reason that I do polls is I want people to understand the other things that are maybe sometimes constraining, or concepts that they're not familiar with, or that they're always been comfortable doing what they've done without recognizing some of it has been constrained and sometimes hindering others.
Matt, it's not, time is not just an enemy of the poor, but it's also an enemy of the alternative learner. If you don't absorb what you need to absorb in that 50 minutes, you're out of luck in a lot of cases, right? You may need 100 minutes or 150 minutes, or you may need it delivered in different ways, and it's not available. And so the challenge is, how do you meet that? That's a huge challenge.
And Jason, you're spot on. I struggled with that growing up, and part of and I I think my latest podcast I talk about the reason I'm in higher ed and I'm here to transform. The reason I left Deloitte to do Beyond is I want to make the transformation for people that are in constrained pieces, where how do we start rethinking education that serves everybody? And you made that. And it isn't just that it's not just the poor, it's anybody that needs that knowledge, that you want to have the access to it at your time as you move forward. So I know I'm with you.
And there was an article, I don't know how many look at Inside Higher Education, and somebody had posted an article about the 50-year subscription to education. And really, we have entered the generation of lifelong learning. We have people that leave and pick up again. Right now, we have people that absorb information at different rates in that. And so we're starting to see subtle changes in some institutions, not all institutions, but in some institutions, in recognition of these things. And we're also starting to see alternative credential engines, so that it's not nearly or not entirely the matter of degree, but maybe getting a certificate in instructional design or something along those lines that counts in the process.
Thinking about the time being enemy of the poor, and what Jason was saying and what Matt's been saying, and what Dr. LeBlanc was saying, it really goes down to how are we delivering value? Knowledge really is a commodity in many ways. What we teach is a commodity. The answer to a lot of everything that we teach is the same university to university. So how are you going to deliver that value of education to people? And we've been locked into this one way of doing it that is basically built around the agricultural life, so that you could take off in the summer and work in the fields. And we've got to rethink how we deliver our value, and thinking about, Jason, alternative ways to accommodate alternative education style. Dr. LeBlanc's comment about, we actually keep our offices open till midnight because that's when our learner logs in. It's all about, time is all about how we deliver value.
I wonder too, though, as you look at long term with, students today, and when I say students today, I'm talking the elementary and middle school students that are being affected positively, negatively with the different ways they're learning now. I look at my nephew who's going to school 3 days a week and then also in person and then have at home work or online work. How that's going to change. I know some of my friends who are parents are saying, my students are doing better in an online format, not going to class, whereas others want to go. I think students are going to have been exposed earlier to these different learning formats and will demand it as they move forward. And we're going to have to adjust in higher ed as they come through and up into the higher ed system.
I think learning model at all levels, K through 12, all the way through college, and I think even the lifelong learning model, I think it is going to be a hybrid model, right? It's going to be how does it serve the purpose of the person that's learning, and is it at that person's rate as well as desire and passion of what that information that they're trying to get into, right? So there's a little bit of that. So absolutely.
Matt, you're using two terms, and I think it's important to distinguish between the terms, because the one, which is knowledge that you're talking about, that's the differentiator. And then there's information. If I look at any degree, 99.9% of the information that's being taught in any degree, I could potentially find by myself, right? But same as I have all the information I need to have a six-pack, but I don't have one. And it's the same in school. So I think knowledge, being able to become the integrator of different strains of knowledge and educate, I think that's the part, because the information part, Maslow's hierarchy of needs hasn't changed, right? It's the same at Harvard as it is at a community college. So what do you do with that?
No, I mean, like I said, I think some of this is how do you position it for each of those users, and how do you allow for it? Like, I call it, the pandemic has sterilized even learning, right? An Econ 101 course looks the same whether you're at Villanova, University of Tennessee, at a community college, at a Harvard. In most cases, that content, especially like Econ 101, which is very structured content, it's taught the same way, has been taught for years the same way, is very similar in nature, right? So what is the value of that, and how does the value of higher ed, support that? So really quick, I just wanted to, just go through the topics here that are constraining higher ed. And the reason I think it's important for us to discuss it, because we're going to have the next discussion is the operating model, right? But I want us to understand, before we have an operating model discussion, you have to understand some of the things that time frame is hindering operating models to change, right? If you think about it, the 20-hour degree and the term structure is very costly, proposition for anyone to take on. It's a very costly element of it. Now, the question is, all right, is that the right thing? There's a lot, if you think about why we're at, this, 120 hours, it comes from just historical, the way that higher ed has been built, right? And it's a very costly model because we are on a earn it model. What are we earning? How do we earn a degree? How do we earn the course? How do we earn, as opposed to moving it to the learn it model, where we're now understanding is the concepts being played. And I'm writing a whole piece on the earn it to learn it model discussion, because I really believe that, and Dr. Blanca is coming out with a book on a whole competency-based element, and I'm looking forward to that. I think there is a discussion that needs to be happening there, because I think the cost effectiveness of what higher ed is based on is because of the time frame that they have there. Any thoughts on that? And then also the 16-week course and how financial aid is built that way, right? So I don't know how many financial aid people are on here or can speak to it, but there's a lot of people that have to be on a 16-week, credit hour to get their aid, or an 8-hour credit hour to get their aid, right? There's these constraints that are out there that are limiting people from actually being able to access education, even with financial support as you move forward.
I'd like to just go and say that there's more to the cost factor than just the time. You have now the physical infrastructures that have been built, the campuses and everything else that you have, and now the residence halls that are out on bonds, and the bookstores that need to make profits so that they can contribute back to the university. So there's a lot of other factors in there, and so while time can reduce, the reduction of time in cases can reduce some of the cost, there's still some layers of cost in there that aren't going to be movable based on the current infrastructures that we have.
Yeah.
One of the points too Dr. LeBlanc was making in terms of time was, it takes people who are in poverty a lot more time to do the simple things. It takes them more time to do laundry. It takes them more time to get to places. And, one of the things that I saw last night on the news was an article about Uber and Lyft providing people rides to the vaccination sites because only 45% of the people who need it have access to public transportation. So if you're in that situation, how are you going to get to school? And if you've got to be there, on a typical class schedule, that becomes a roadblock for you to actually learn and for you to actually, get through. So it's not just time in terms of how we structure class, if it's 16 weeks or 18, 8 weeks, or how we would do it, but just the roadblocks of people who literally live one flat tire away from having to drop out. We've got to think about them when we build our new constructs.
I would even add another dimension to the concept of time for impoverished individuals. It's how long out is my ROI? If I'm waiting 2 to 4 years for ROI, that's not something that's feasible. I'm living month to month, check to check, and it's the opportunity cost. And we talk about opportunity cost in so many ways, but for a person who's living paycheck to paycheck, 4, 8, 12 hours a week spent schooling is 4, 8, 12 hours a week that could be spent working a second job, a part-time job. And, I'm a college dropout who left because I needed a paycheck to support my family. That's all there was to it. So the cost of the schooling, the cost of all the things associated with the institution is very important. But for somebody who's living at poverty levels or near poverty levels, I'm thinking of my monthly budget. I'm thinking of bringing in income, and I'm thinking of how to improve that situation week to week, month to month. And 4 years out, getting a potential return is not something many people can afford to think of.
The last school I worked at was a historically Black institution, and my office was off campus. And one morning I came out and I saw this kid sleeping in the car. And the next day I saw him sleeping in the car. So I went up to him, and it was one of our students that was living in his car and didn't have meals in that. And so you see the food pantries popping up and everything else, but absolutely correct. 4 years is irrelevant to them. It's tomorrow, and that's what we need to be thinking about.
And I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, the major corporations that are looking for talent, it's the same. Waiting 4 years for the next wave of talent pool is not an efficient supply chain as well. And my thought as I talk with large corporations about their learning programs, in addition to universities, is if the time to providing the supply of people doesn't get better, corporations will just solve it on their own.